I smiled. Patrick cleared his throat and said, "If we could all take a seat." He caught my eye. Hazel, he said, "I'm so glad to see you." Everyone said that Patrick began his retelling of his balllessness, and I fell into the routine of support group, communicating through sighs with Isaac, feeling sorry for everyone in the room and also everyone outside of it, zoning out of the conversation to focus on my breathlessness and the aching. The world went on as it does without my full participation, and I only woke up from the reverie when someone said my name. It was Lida the Strong, Lida in remission, blonde, healthy, stout Lida, who swam on her high school swim team. Lida, missing only her appendix, saying my name, saying, "Hazel is such an inspiration to me. She really is. She just keeps fighting the battle, waking up every morning and going to war without complaint. She's so strong. She's so much stronger than I. I just wish I had her strength." Hazel, Patrick asked, "How does that make you feel?" I shrugged and looked over at Lida. "I'll give you my strength if I can have your remission." I felt guilty as soon as I said it. "I don't think that's what Lida meant," Patrick said. "I think she," but I had to stop listening. After the prayers for the living and the endless litany of the dead, with Michael tagged onto the end, we held hands and said, "Living our best life today." Lida immediately rushed up to me, full of apology and explanation, and I said, "No, no, it's really fine," waving her off. And I said to Isaac, "Care to accompany me upstairs?" He took my arm and I walked with him to the elevator, grateful to have an excuse to avoid the stairs. I had almost made it all the way to the elevator when I saw his mom standing in a corner of the literal heart. "I'm here," she said to Isaac, and he switched from my arm to hers before asking, "You want to come over?" "Sure," I said. I felt bad for him, even though I hated the sympathy people felt toward me, but I couldn't help but feel it toward him. Isaac lived in a small ranch house in Meridian Hills next to this fancy private school. We sat down in the living room while his mom went off to the kitchen to make dinner, and then he asked if I wanted to play a game. "Sure," I said. So he asked for the remote. I gave it to him, and he turned on the TV and then a computer attached to it. The TV screen stayed black, but after a few seconds, a deep voice spoke from it. "Deception." The voice said, "One player, two." Two. Isaac said, "Pause." He turned to me. "I play this game with Gus all the time, but it's infuriating because he's a completely suicidal video game player. He's like way too aggressive about saving civilians and whatnot." "Ah, yeah," I said, remembering the night of the broken trophies. And pause. Isaac said, "Player one, identify yourself." "This is the player one, sexy voice," Isaac said. "Player two, identify yourself." "I would be player two, I guess," I said. Staff Sergeant Max Mayhem and Private Jasper Jacks awake in a dark, empty room, approximately 12 feet square. Isaac pointed toward the TV like I should talk to it or something. I said, "Is there a light switch?" "No." "Is there a door?" Private Jack locates the door. It is locked. Isaac jumped in. "There is a key above the door frame." "Yes, there is." Mayhem opens the door. The darkness is still complete. "A take out knife," Isaac said. "Take out knife," I added. A kid, Isaac's brother, Asim, darted out from the kitchen. He was maybe 10, weary and overenergetic, and he kind of skipped across the living room before shouting in a really good imitation of Isaac's voice, "Kill myself." Sergeant Mayhem places his knife to his neck. "Are you sure you?" "No," Isaac said. "Pause. Graham, don't make me kick your ass." Graham laughed giddily and skipped off down a hallway. As Mayhem and Jax, Isaac and I felt our way forward in the cavern until we bumped into a guy whom we stabbed after getting him to tell us that we were in a Ukrainian prison cave more than a mile beneath the ground. As we continued, sound effects, a raging underground river, voices speaking in Ukrainian and extended English led you through the cave, but there was nothing to see in this game. After playing for an hour, we began to hear the cries of a desperate prisoner, pleading, "God, help me, God, help me." "Pause," Isaac said. "This is when Gus always insists on finding the prisoner, even though that keeps you from winning the game. And the only way to actually free the prisoner is to win the game. Yeah, he takes video games too seriously, I said. He's a bit too enamored with metaphor. Do you like him? Isaac said. Of course I like him. He is great. But you don't want to hook up with him? I shrugged. It's complicated. I know what you are trying to do. You don't want to give him something he can't handle. You don't want him to Monica you, he said. Kinda. I said, but it wasn't that. The truth was, I didn't want to Isaac him. To be fair to Monica, I said, what you did to her as an wasn't very nice either. What did I do to her? He asked, defensive. You know, going blind and everything. But that's not my fault, I just said. But I'm not saying it was your fault. I'm saying it wasn't nice. Chapter 10. We could only take one suitcase. I couldn't carry one, and mom insisted that she couldn't carry two, so we had to jockey for space in this black suitcase my parents had gotten as a wedding present a million years ago, a suitcase that was supposed to spend its life in exotic locales but ended up mostly going back and forth to Dayton. Her Morris Property Incorporated had a satellite office that Dad often visited. I argued with mom that I should have slightly more than half of the suitcase since without me and my cancer, we had never been going to Amsterdam in the first place. Mom countered that since she was twice as large as me and therefore required more physical fabric to preserve her modesty, she deserved at least two-thirds of the suitcase. In the end, we both lost, so it goes. Our flight didn't leave until noon, but mom woke me up at 5:30, turning on the light and shouting, "Stay Amsterdam!" She ran around all morning, making sure we had international flag adapters and quadruple checking that we had the right number of oxygen tanks to get there and that they were all full, etc. Well, I just rolled out of bed, put on my travel to Amsterdam outfit, jeans, a pink tank top, and a black cardigan in case the plane was cold. The car was packed by 6:15, whereupon mom insisted that we eat breakfast with dad, although I had a moral opposition to eating before dawn on the grounds that I was not a 19th century Russian peasant fortifying myself for a day in the fields. But anyway, I tried to stomach down some eggs while mom and dad enjoyed these homemade versions of egg MC muffins they like. Why are breakfast foods? I asked them. Like, why don't we have curry for breakfast? Hazel eat. But why? I asked. I mean, seriously, how did scrambled eggs get stuck with breakfast exclusivity? You can put bacon on a sandwich without anyone freaking out, but the moment your sandwich has an egg, boo, it's a breakfast sandwich. Dad answered with his mouth full. When you come back, we'll have breakfast for dinner. Deal? I don't want to have breakfast for dinner, I answered, crossing knife and fork over my mostly full plate. I want to have scrambled eggs for dinner without this ridiculous construction that a scrambled egg inclusive meal is breakfast even when it occurs at dinner time. You have got to pick your battles in this world, Hazel, my mom said. But if this is the issue you want to champion, we'll stand behind you. Quite a bit behind you, my dad and mom laughed. Anyway, I knew it was stupid, but I felt kind of bad for scrambled eggs. After they finished eating, dad did the dishes and walked us to the car. Of course, he started crying and he kissed my cheek with his wet, such stubbly face. He pressed his nose against my cheekbone and whispered, I love you. I'm so proud of you. For what? I wondered. Thanks, Dad. I'll see you in a few days, okay, sweetie? I love you so much. I love you too, Dad. I smiled, and it's only 3 days. As we backed out of the driveway, I kept waving at him. He was waving back and crying. It occurred to me that he was probably thinking he might never see me again, which he probably thought every single morning of his entire weekday life as he left for work, which probably sucked. When I drove over to Augusta's house, and when he got there, she wanted me to stay in the car to rest, but I went to the door with her anyway. As we approached the house, I could hear someone crying inside. I didn't think it was Gus at first because it didn't sound anything like the low rumble of his speaking, but then I heard a voice that was definitely a twisted version of his say, because it is my life, mom. It belongs to me. And quickly, my mom put her arm around my shoulders and spun me back toward the car, walking quickly. And I was like, Mom, what's wrong? And she said, we can't eavesdrop, Hazel. We got back into the car and I texted Augustus that we were outside whenever he was ready. We stayed at the house for a while. The weird thing about houses is that they almost always look like nothing is happening inside of them, even though they can contain most of our lives. I wondered if that was short of the point of architecture? Well, mom said after a while, we are pretty early, I guess. Almost as if I didn't have to get up at 5:30, I said. Mom reached down to the console between us, grabbed her coffee mug, and took a sip. My phone buzzed. A text from Augustus. Just can't decide what to wear. Do you like me better in a polo or a button down? I replied, button down. 30 seconds later, the front door opened. A smiling Augustus appeared, a roller bag behind him. He wore a pressed sky blue button down tucked into his jeans. A camel light dangled from his lips. My mom got out to say hi to him. He took the cigarette out momentarily and spoke in the confident voice to which I was accustomed. Always a pleasure to see you, ma'am. I watched them through the rear view mirror until mom opened the trunk. Moments later, Augustus opened the door behind me and engaged in the complicated business of entering the backseat of a car with one leg. Do you want shotgun? I asked. Absolutely not, he said. And hello, Hazel Grace. Hi, I said. Okay, I asked. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. I got in and closed the car door. Next stop, Amsterdam, she announced, which was not quite true. The next stop was the airport parking lot, and then a bus took us to the terminal, and then an open air electric car took us to the security line. The TSA guy at the front of the line was shouting about how our bags had better not contain explosives or firearms or anything liquid over 3 ounces. And I said to Augustus, observation, standing in line is a form of operation. And he said, seriously? Rather than be searched by hand, I chose to walk through the metal detector without my card or my tank or even the plastic numbness in my nose. Walking through the X-ray machine marked the first time I had taken a step without oxygen in some months, and it felt pretty amazing to walk encumbered like that, stepping across the Rubicon, the machine's silence acknowledging that I was, however briefly, a non-metallized creature. I felt a bodily sovereignty that I can really describe, except to say that when I was a kid, I used to have a really heavy backpack that I carried everywhere with all my books in it, and if I walked around with the backpack for long enough, when I took it off, I felt like I was floating. After about 10 seconds, my lungs felt like they were folding in upon themselves like flowers at dusk. I sat down on a grey bench just past the machine and tried to catch my breath, my cuff rattling drizzle. I felt pretty miserable until I got the cannula back into place. Even then, it hurt. The pain was always there, pulling me inside of myself, demanding to be felt. It always felt like I was waking up from the pain when something in the world outside of me suddenly required um my comment or attention. Mom was looking at me concerned. She had just said something. What had she just said? Then I remember she had asked what was wrong. Nothing, I said. Amsterdam. She half shouted. I smiled. Amsterdam, I answered. She reached her hand down to me and pulled me up. We got to the gate an hour before our scheduled boarding time. Mrs. Lancaster, you are an impressively punctual person, Augustus said as he sat down next to me in the mostly empty gate area. Well, it helps that I'm not technically very busy, she said. You're plenty busy, I told her. Although it occurred to me that mom's business was mostly me, there was also the business of being married to my dad. He was kind of clueless about like banking and hiring plumbers and cooking and doing things other than working for Morris Property Incorporated. But it was mostly me. Her primary reason for living and my primary for reason for leaving were awfully entangled. As the seats around the gate started to fill, Augusta said, I'm gonna get a hamburger before we leave. Can I get you anything? No, I said, but I really appreciate your refusal to give in to breakfast social conventions. He tilted his head at me, confused. Hazel has developed an issue with the ghettoization of scrambled eggs. Mom said, it's embarrassing that we all just walk through life blindly accepting that scrambled eggs are fundamentally associated with mornings. I want to talk about this more, Augustus said. But I'm starving. I'll be right back. So when Augustus hadn't showed up after 20 minutes, I asked Mom if she thought something was wrong, and she looked up from her awful magazine only long enough to say, he probably just went to the bathroom or something. A gate agent came over and switched my oxygen container out with one provided by the airline. I was embarrassed to have this lady kneeling in front of me while everyone watched, so I texted Augustus while she did it. I didn't reply. Mom seemed unconcerned, but I was imagining all kinds of Amsterdam trip ruining fares. Arrest, injury, mental breakdown. I felt like there was something non-cancery wrong with my chest as the minutes ticked away. And just when the lady behind the ticket counter announced they were going to start pre-boarding people who might need a bit of extra time, and every single person in the gate area turned squarely to me. I saw Augustus fast limping towards us with an empty donuts bag in one hand, his backpack slung over his shoulder. Where are you? I asked. Line got super long, sorry, he said, offering me a hand up. I took it and we all walked side by side to the gate to pre-board. I could feel everybody watching us, wondering what was wrong with us and whether it would kill us and how heroic my mom must be and everything else. That was the most part about having cancer sometimes. The physical evidence of disease separates you from other people. We were in irreconcilably other, and never was it more obvious than when the three of us walked through that empty play, the stewardess nodding sympathetically and gesturing us toward our row in the distant back. I sat in the middle of our three-person row with Augustus in the window seat and Mom in the aisle. I felt a little hemmed in by Mom, so of course I scooted over toward Augustus. We were right behind the plane swing. He opened up his bag and unwrapped his burger. The thing about eggs, though, he said, is that breakfastization gives the scrambled egg a certain sacrality, right? You can get yourself home some bacon or cheddar cheese anywhere in town. From tacos to breakfast sandwiches to grilled cheese, but scrambled eggs, they're important. Ludicrous, I said. The people are starting to file into the plane now. I didn't want to look at them, so I looked away and to look away us to look at Augustus. I'm just saying, maybe a scrambled eggs are ghettoist, but they're also special. They have a place and a time like church does. You couldn't be more wrong, I said. You are peering into the cross stitched sentiments of your parents through pillows. You are arguing that the fragile, rare thing is beautiful simply because it is fragile and rare, but that's a lie, and you know it. You are a hard person to comfort, Augustus said. Easy comfort isn't comforting, I said. You are a rare and fragile flower once. You remember? For a moment he said nothing. You don't know how to shut me up. Hazel Grace. It's my privilege and my responsibility, I answered. Before I broke eye contact with him, he said, listen, sorry I avoided the gate area. The MC Donuts line wasn't really that long. I just didn't want to sit there with all those people looking at us or whatever. At me mostly, I said. You could glance at Gus and never know he had been sick, but I carried my disease with me on the outside, which is part of why I had become a homebody in the first place. Augustus Waters, noted charismatist, is embarrassed to sit next to a girl with an oxygen tank. Not embarrassed, he said. They just piss me off sometimes, and I don't want to be pissed off today. After a minute, he dug into his pocket and flipped open his pack of smokes. About 9 seconds later, a blonde stewardess rushed over to our row and said, sir, you can smoke on this plane or any plane. I don't smoke, he explained, the cigarette dancing in his mouth as he spoke. But it's a metaphor, I explained. He puts the killing thing in his mouth but doesn't give it the power to kill him. The stewardess was flummoxed for only a moment. Well, that metaphor is prohibited on today's flight, she said. Gus nodded and rejoined the cigarette to its pack.